Hi, everyone. It is so great to, well, I guess I can't see you, but good morning and welcome to the 2021 Technology, Media, Telecommunications Predictions with the great speaker, Duncan Stewart, who is the Director of Research at Deloitte, Canada. We are thrilled to see so many new and old faces attending today's event, which, this event is really a highly anticipated event every year. In fact, we did sell out, so we're streaming live to Facebook to accommodate all those who may have registered early or just forgot to register. So before we get started, I would like to say thank you to all of our event sponsors, including Deloitte, who we've partnered with this event for almost a decade, the City of Windsor, Invest Windsor Essex, SOAR Innovation, and the Chatham-Kent Economic Development Corporation. Over the next 60 plus minutes, if you're new to TMT, you're in for a great treat. And if you've attended these events, you're in for a deep dive in tech trends for 2021 and beyond. And we've asked Duncan to do a special focus on the auto sector. So we're not going to talk about flying cars just yet, but we are going to talk about some of the new and enhanced technologies that the automaker is going to be leveraging to power the factories of the future. We're also going to be taking a deep dive into things like telemedicine. So this isn't just a pandemic thing. This is real. This is going to continue. We're going to talk about 8K TVs, women in sports, and so much more. If you do have questions for Duncan, he always leaves plenty of time to address them, so feel free to ask him anything using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. So for those of you who may be taking down notes, again, we're recording today's session. Duncan will share the slides, so please sit back and enjoy, take it all in. And with that, I'm going to keep my remarks short. I have the pleasure to turn things over to Jason Rayner, who is the newest addition to the municipality of the City of Windsor. He's our new incoming CAO. Jason, I would love you to join us this morning.
Hello. Can you see me and hear me, Yvonne?
Yes, I can.
Great, awesome. Just a very warm welcome to everyone to Deloitte's Global TMT Predictions 2021. My name is Jason Rayner, as Yvonne said, and I'm the new Chief Administrative Officer at the City of Windsor. So far in week 5, things are looking pretty darn good still. I'm in the high of the honeymoon, I think. I'm very excited to be here, and the City of Windsor is just so pleased to partner alongside so many of our regional community partners that Yvonne mentioned at the outset there. Thanks very much to everyone who put this on today. These things don't just come together with one quick email. They're a lot of work, and so we really appreciate that. And as I understand it, the TMT Predictions is a premier annual event for the City of Windsor and the region, and we really look forward to supporting the delivery of this event with our regional partners today. It's a great opportunity for community members, businesses large and small, NGOs, local government, to hear firsthand about the upcoming technology trends and what we all need to consider as we make the most of the coming months and years ahead. And frankly, we could all use some crystal ball help these days. Am I right? When the ground seems to shift daily with this global pandemic, we're all in need of some information and ideas, and the information that Mr. Duncan Stewart is going to share with us today. I'm hoping he gives some stock predictions too. I could really use some help there, but maybe we'll just stick to the TMT predictions. But from the community and the city's perspective, I think we all really need this knowledge to help us define a future that is safe, equitable, and innovative. The recent Windsor Works report approved by City Council that many of you may be familiar with is really going to be our guiding light as we shepherd in a new era of economic growth and diversification for this region. And if you haven't had a chance, take a gander at the future economy pillar of that Windsor Works report as we attempt to leverage what the future holds for us here. With Mayor Dilkins leading the way and council support, the City of Windsor is leveraging our current strengths in the auto sector and diversifying our adjacent sectors into adjacent sectors such as technology, in healthcare, and border technology. Specifically, we're excited to explore establishing Canada's first ramp-up factory for electric and autonomous vehicles, continuing to work with the province to prioritize the region for battery production, gigafactories, maybe even as early as 2025, and to build expertise in software and cybersecurity for autonomous vehicles, among other things. At the moment, we're busy working on the implementation plan here at the city and looking forward to engaging all of our partners and stakeholders in that process. we're really working hard to translate those policy objectives and those strategy pieces into tangible actions over the coming weeks, months, and years ahead. It'll be our detailed roadmap that utilizes the trends identified by Deloitte and others as we work to partner to make significant leaps forward. Let's be honest, we just can't afford to wait. And there's so many wonderful projects already underway, as many of you know, like creating a digital twin of the Windsor-Detroit tunnel, the development of an innovation corridor, an e-vehicle ramp-up factory and scale-up programming, the boost acceleration services, and I could go on, and I'm just learning. I've only been here 5 weeks. But trends, such as the intelligent edge, cloud migration, 5G, virtual reality, all of those things that we're going to hear more about and you've been reading about are really what we need to leverage and seize those opportunities as we move forward. Anyway, enough about me and the city. I'm just delighted to be here, and I can't wait to hear Duncan's talk. So please join me in welcoming him and our introducer to the region. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thanks, Jason. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Matt Larman. He's the Senior Manager of Global Investment and Innovation Incentives at Deloitte. Matt is going to bring remarks on behalf of our key sponsor, Deloitte, as well as introduce our amazing keynote speaker, Duncan Stewart. So Matt, I'll invite you to join the stage.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Yvonne. Appreciate that, and thanks, Jason. Yeah, as Yvonne and Jason noted there, my name is Matt Larmond. I'm a senior manager in Deloitte's Global Investment Innovation Incentives practice. I also help lead the automotive industry practice as chief of staff for Canada more broadly. The economic and technological rate of change that we're currently experiencing is rapid and unprecedented. Layering in a global pandemic exacerbates the pressures that these changes have on the Canadian companies. In response, we continue to see the tenacity and ingenuity of Canadians shining through, innovating new technologies, investing in their businesses, and expanding their global reach. My role, along with my team that comprises of engineers, scientists, accountants, and economists, is to help Canadian companies identify grants and incentives opportunities to fuel their growth and innovation. Being born and raised in Windsor and Essex, I know many of you in this audience, and never get more professional satisfaction than seeing local businesses enabled to grow by leveraging incentives that we help them achieve. We're energized to work with many business leaders in this community and be part of the growth journey. At Deloitte, we are increasing our focus and investment on serving clients in the mid-market, including in and around the Windsor, Essex, and Chatham-Kent regions, as these are the businesses that require a diverse set of services, including audit, tax, risk advisory, financial advisory, and consulting. Deloitte has been a long-time supporter of technology and innovation in the region. In fact, it was a Deloitte CEO IT peer group formed more than 10 years ago that sparked a conversation between regional industry leaders and entrepreneurs, which eventually laid the groundwork and led to the creation of WeTech Alliance. As many of you know, we have been bringing TMT Predictions to this community with partners such as WeTech for nearly a decade. And for that, I want to thank WeTech again for hosting today's session. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the regional partners involved, the City of Windsor, Invest Windsor Essex, as well as the Chatham-Kent Economic Development Corp and SOAR Innovation. Given the current environment, we believe it's more important than ever for opportunities like this to provide a platform for businesses to stay informed and continue to evolve and thrive. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Duncan Stewart, Director of Research at Deloitte Canada and co-author of our annual TMT Predictions report since 2008. Over to you, Duncan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much, Matt, Jason, Yvonne. Yvonne, I think it was, gosh, 8 years ago, we did a TMT Predictions event down in Windsor, and it was at a brewery. And for those of you who think that I miss travel, well, that would be a good example of it. I remember that. It was a fun event a long time ago. So just to kind of go through some of the highlights here, welcome to my kitchen, as always. I look forward to doing this in person next year. Get that off the slides. I am joined by a special guest this year. My colleague from the US, Susanne Hupfer, is the author of an advanced wireless report and actually has some interesting data about the use of Wi-Fi 6 and 5G technologies in the automotive industry. So she's at the very end of the talk. She's going to take us on a little whirlwind tour of some of the findings from that report. So we'll save that. We'll save that as the dessert for the end of the event. As Yvonne said, you do get a copy of the slides. The Q&A button is there. I find it actually works best if you ask your questions as we go. So if you've got a question about telemedicine, which is what I'm about to talk about first, please do ask it then, and I'll try to address it as much as possible in the flow. Everybody ready? I see 8:42. Let's get going. Let me see if I can advance my slides here. Come on, slides. There we go. I am actually going to be skipping a couple of the topics that I had originally thought about talking about, like 8K TV. I just don't think we've got time with Susanne's slides. But let's start off by talking about video visits. As we all know, accelerated by the pandemic, but the real question gets to be, where do we go from here? We predict that the percentage of virtual video visits will rise 50-fold from where they were compared to pre-pandemic. Why does that matter so much? Because we go to the doctor a lot around the world. There's about 8.5 billion doctors visits per year. It's a $500 billion market, and 5% of that is a giant number. We're looking at hundreds of millions of visits, tens of billions of dollars in value, but it's not just that. When we take a look at the market for virtual visit solutions, we can see some really big numbers as well. About 8 billion in revenue. So this is going to be names like Teladoc Livongo in the US, Dr. Lieb in France, here in Canada, names like Maple and Click, or TELUS Health. We just got some new data on TELUS Health, and I'm not saying this is true or not true, but people out there are saying it may go public this year and may have a valuation of in the billions. So that gives you an idea of how important this is globally and in Canada. One of the interesting additional markets is not purely for telehealth, it's for FDA-approved home health care technology that you can plug into your smartphone or your computer or tablet, and that supercharges the video visit experience. Doctors can talk to us over our video cameras, but they can't take our blood sugar, blood pressure, pulse oximetry, atrial fibrillation, EEG, EKG. You get the idea. There are a host of medically approved home healthcare devices that can be used in conjunction with a video call to allow doctors to get a much better picture of their patient's health. I was at CES in Las Vegas, virtually, of course, this January, and home healthcare technology was one of the hottest spaces. So we think that's a $30+ billion market growing at double-digit rates. I see there's a question in the Q&A. I'm just going to mouse up there and see what people have. Is there any emerging trend for AI doctors to help mitigate? That's from Lee Doucette. Lee, I'm gonna, you know what? I'll take that right now. Lee, thanks for asking. That's you've broken my flow, but that's cool. I encourage you to ask questions, and you are. Appreciate that. So Lee, not a lot. So there's a couple things that AI can do in terms of healthcare. One of them is that you can use artificial intelligence / machine learning algorithms to go through tissue samples and biopsies and MRIs and CAT scans and radio images and stuff like that. And those are actually really useful screening tools to help. They don't replace doctors, but they can certainly allow doctors and pathologists and so forth to work really, really quickly. That is totally a thing, and it's growing. And some of those AI-powered screening solutions, looking at images and stuff like that, those are as good or better even than human testing. So that's an important and growing space. Where it is not actually succeeding is the idea of using an AI doctor instead of talking to a real doctor for a patient contact. That technology is a pretty bad failure so far. There have been a number of attempts. None of them work terribly well. It turns out that talking to people and saying, how do you feel today, is a problem that AI is not yet ready for. There are some solutions. Many of those have in fact been tried and deinstalled. So that replacing the doctor for this kind of conversation, that's at a guess 3 to 5 years off minimum, might even be longer. So appreciate that question. Okay, now back to telehealth. So what's going on here? Huge numbers during the pandemic. Everybody saw that. But let me take you on the next slide here, because this is a fascinating experiment in what we saw at the Wexner Medical Center. That's just across, basically, well, across Lake Erie and south a bit from where you are. So this is at Ohio State University. Wexner is one of the big medical centers in the States. And what they did is they published this in an academic peer-reviewed paper. And as you can see, telehealth was not a major factor pre-pandemic. As of March 1st, 2020, 0.1% of all visits were done virtually and 99.9% in person. 4 weeks later, as the pandemic got rolling, a really interesting thing started to happen. You can see here that the telehealth percentage just surged, 92%. Wow. However, at first, it was primarily over the telephone, about 71%. Video was much smaller. But fast forward only a month later, and you can see that it flipped. By April 26th, you can see that although the percentage of telehealth is about the same, 93%, all of a sudden, 7 out of 10 visits are now being done over video. So why is that? And I think it's all about the learning curve. So I was actually over in Europe and Turkey and stuff like that in mid-March last year, just as the pandemic was starting, and I came back. As of March 15th, the day I kind of got back from Europe, I don't think I had ever done a Zoom call in my life. 1 month later, I think I may have done 200. So there was this tremendous learning curve around video. This is supported by UK data. This is from UK. As you can see, the percentage of people who were making video calls more than doubled in the period between February and May of 2020. So I think that accounts for this whole shift. Now, all of this is fine. Yeah, during the pandemic, people use video calls. Who cares? What happens post-pandemic in what we're calling N2, or the next normal? Well, we actually have some Deloitte research on that. This was published by my colleagues at the Deloitte Center for Health Solutions in February. They did a thing where they asked 50 of the leading clinics and hospitals and doctors in the States a series of questions. Now, I want you to focus here on chronic condition management and primary care. Those were responsible for 2/3 or so of all medical visits in Canada and the US every year. So those are the big ones. Now, what we're looking at here is that during the pandemic, at peak, dark green bars, the respondents to our survey said that between 40 and 45% of all visits were being done virtually. Okay, that more or less fits. But then we asked, what do you think is the right level, the optimal number, the best number going forward? And this number just blew me away because I was expecting them to say 5, 10, 15%. They said that between 30 and 34% of visits should be virtual in the future. Now, I have, we published this prediction back at the start of the year, and I've been talking to lots of people around the world ever since. There's been a seismic shift. It is not, by the way, that virtual visits replace physical. That is not going to happen. There are still lots and lots and lots of things you need to see the doctor in person for, and that's never going to change. However, let's change the medical path, the journey. When Duncan doesn't feel well, I used to historically call up my doctor here in Toronto, and they would say, come on in and see Fred. That's my doctor's name. Going forward, what we should do is first, let's have a video call between you and Fred. Maybe Fred can solve your problem. Maybe Fred says, Duncan, you don't need to see me. Don't come into the clinic. Go to see the specialist. Or, Duncan, go to the hospital. Only in some cases will he actually say, Duncan, come in and see me right here in the clinic. The idea is that video visits should be a screening tool so that as part of figuring out where we go next with a specific treatment, we don't have people doing unnecessary trips into the doctor's office when they don't need to. Why? Because doctors don't like that. Patients don't like that. It's inconvenient. It takes time. If I can solve my problem with a video call, that's great. And if I can save myself a trip, that's great. And everybody's happy. It's a win-win-win. So our prediction is, based on a lot of data out there, that these video visits are going to be a big part of the next normal. Once again, they do not replace in-person. They are instead the thing that happens before the in-person visit as yet another screening tool. I see a nice question here from Blaise Merkovich. Is there any predicted movement in HIPAA laws or FDA regulations when it comes to virtual health? Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that, Blaise. Thank you for your question. So let's talk a little bit about that regulatory answer. So And I'm going to do it globally because it's different in the US and in Canada and the UK and in France and so forth. Historically, there have been sometimes very, very strict laws about phone visits and video visits around privacy and reimbursement, okay? During the pandemic, fairly obviously, those were waived, not just in the US, but around the world. Basically, if the only way you could get medical care was a video call, let's change the rules. At this point, regulators are discussing the concept of re-regulation. Going forward, we need to make sure that there are some privacy and security and reimbursement angles considered. However, almost everybody I'm talking to around the world is not a regulatory free-for-all where, like, no, you don't have to follow any laws, but it's also not what we had in 2019. We have now had over a year of video visits, of virtual visits, and by and large, privacy, security, all of these things have in fact not been game-breaking issues. It's gone quite well. So the regulators I'm talking to have said, we are going to re-regulate, but lightly. So we will have a long list of approved solutions that are HIPAA compliant. We will have a long list of things that are FDA approved. We will have a long list of things in the UK that are approved. Same here in Canada. So great question. I do not anticipate regulators getting in the way of heavy use of video visits. That's the TLDR. Okay, next topic. Oh, hang on. Here's another question. Rob Went, well, healthcare systems, Blue Shield, pay doctors the same for a virtual visit. So this, Rob, this is another one of those. So historically, either virtual visits were not allowed or they were reimbursed at a fraction of an in-person visit. Like if it was $100 for an in-person visit, it was $10 for video. And doctors were like, no, I'm not going to do that. Why? If it takes me 15 minutes to talk to Duncan in person and it takes me 13 minutes to talk to Duncan on the video call, I'm not going to accept 90% less money. It just doesn't make any sense. So in the reimbursement field, what they did is they went from low reimbursement or zero to full reimbursement. You got paid as a doctor exactly what you would for an in-person visit, okay? They are discussing going forward, there might be a slight, Rob, a very slight delta. So if it's $100 reimbursement for an in-person visit, a video visit, because it's easier and more convenient and so forth, maybe it's 95 or maybe it's 90 or something like that. So tiny discount for a doctor, that makes sense. You don't have people cluttering up your waiting room. The no-show rate is much lower for video visits because, you know, people don't miss bus connections and stuff like that. So the reimbursement issue, once again, we are not anticipating will be a significant barrier. Okay, that was a great topic. Let's keep driving. Next one. I want to talk about next generation radio access networks. These are called RANs. Radio access network, RAN. When you look at a cell phone tower, you're looking at the RAN, the radios and antennas up top, and there's a baseband unit down at the bottom. Historically, that's been a closed ecosystem. Imagine if you bought a kitchen and you had to buy your washing machine, your stove, your refrigerator, all from the same manufacturer, or none of them worked. And if something broke, you had to get all the parts from that manufacturer, and all the fixing had to be done by the people from that manufacturer. That's what the cellular networks have looked like for 50 years now. If you bought your stuff from Ericsson or Huawei or Samsung or ZTE or Nokia, you were a closed shop. And that's just the way it was for years. There's this new thing out there called Open RAN, which is just emerging. I'll talk about those numbers, but there's a lot of catalysts for this right now. Now, I'm going to pause. Duncan, why are you talking to a bunch of people in Windsor, Essex, and Chatham about Open RAN? Shouldn't you be talking to Bell or TELUS or Rogers or something? Yeah. One of the areas where you might use Open RAN is at the total cellular network across Canada. That's actually not happening very quickly. It is in some countries, but not here in Canada. Where this gets much more interesting for this audience is we are seeing Open RAN being used for private 5G networks. As people like automobile factories are building advanced wireless networks, one of the ways they're looking at it is they're saying, let's not just buy gear from the big five. Let's instead try this Open RAN thing. Why? cost savings. It tends to be 30 to 40% cheaper on both CapEx and OpEx. You have more control over it. There's more vendors out there. Theoretically, over the long run, open systems should see more innovation and new products coming. So keep an eye on that one. We are seeing I am seeing around the world, multiple private 5G networks that are looking at using Open RAN. Okay, so pay attention to this one. This actually doesn't matter much for Bell and TELUS and Rogers. This does matter for you. Okay, so let's talk about where we're going with this. Around the world, a bunch of carriers. Vodafone is doing a lot in this. In Turkey, I was just on a call in Turkey last week. In the States, Dish is working really strongly on this. They just announced this on a call last week. India, they're looking at it, in Japan. So our prediction, number of Open RAN deployments are going to double. What does that look like in terms of location? Mainly in urban areas at this point. However, once again, private 5G, that would be another one that should be in here. We didn't actually test for that in this survey, but I think that would be a big factor. I think private 5G would be a big driver here. So if you've got a big factory right downtown, maybe you use public 5G. But if you're out in the middle of maybe a less dense area where the public networks aren't that good, building your own private network with Open RAN might make a lot of sense. Dollar size, Open RAN, small last year, oh gosh, $200-ish million, which is tiny. This year, 600 million or so, that's getting there. Billion next year, woo, crossover a billion, and then continuing to grow. Small, but certainly one of these things to keep your eye on. And once again, to repeat, where this gets interesting, and maybe Susanne will be able to talk about this when she comes to her bit at the end, but I see the from this audience's perspective, the single biggest market being in that area. I'm going to skip over this one. Take a look. If you're interested in this, keep a close eye on Rakuten. They are kind of the poster child for now for Open RAN. They're building a network in Japan. It's up, it's running, it's cheap, it's reliable, it's fast, it's got users. They've got a great blog. Take a look at it. I'm not seeing any questions come in on Open RAN. Doesn't surprise me. It's a bit of a techie topic. But now let's talk about the cloud, okay? Everybody loves the cloud. Last year, the cloud grew 30-ish%. Who cares? It grew at 30% the year before. Yeah, that's not the interesting bit. The interesting bit is not that cloud grew at 30. It's that non-cloud shrank by 10 to 15%. This, oh, by the way, in cloud so far, we finished Q1 and the numbers are out and cloud is growing. It's actually accelerating. It was like 34, 35 in Q1, just astonishing numbers. Once again, non-cloud IT continues to shrink. What does all this mean? Duncan, why are you telling me this? Back in 2019, around the world, total enterprise compute workload, believe it or not, was still almost 60% on-prem. Cloud was just a snick over 40. Fast forward to the end of this year, and that is once again going to flip. 65-ish% of total enterprise workload will now be done in public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud. On-prem will have dropped to about 35%. This is, as Satya Nadella has put it, years of transformation in months, just a remarkable shift. Now, a little bit of context here. Around the world, not everybody is using cloud equally. For example, Europe is maybe a little slower. Asia is the fastest. US, Canada, somewhere in between. We're pretty much on the global average. Industries, public sector, finance, and believe it or not, telcos are actually less likely to use the cloud, but things like manufacturing, supply chain, logistics, automotive, more likely to be shifting to the cloud. We have some supporting data points. Data traffic is way up, doubling. The stocks that do the cloud stuff. Jason, you were looking for stock picks. This isn't a stock pick, but it is certainly a stock observation. In 2020, cloud ETFs did nearly twice as well as the NASDAQ and nearly 4 times as well as the S&P 500. So keep an eye on the markets. You know, they're telling us something there. Hyperscale CapEx, huge, $100 billion a year. 24% growth. It would be higher this year, except for the chip shortage that I'm sure many of you have heard about. One point I do want to make, the cloud is green. Doing stuff in the cloud, one, is way more energy efficient than doing it on-prem. Two, it's more efficient than it was last year. This is a nice slide from our friends at Google with numbers for Amazon and Microsoft and Alibaba would be more or less the same. The idea here is there's this thing called PUE. PUE stands for power usage efficiency, and it's a measure of how efficient the large scale data centers are. Back in 2008, Google had a PUE of about 1.2. That meant that of the electricity that came into Google data centers, about 80% was used for computing, and 20% was used for ventilation and air conditioning and lighting and backup power supplies and stuff like that. So it was 20% inefficient. As of 2019, they've driven that down to only 10% efficient. So that's amazing. In 13 years, we have halved the inefficiency of data centers worldwide. And as you can see, it kind of every 3-4 years, it trends down yet another 0.1. So really making some astonishing strides there. Now, one of the things I like doing with these predictions webinars is not just talking about the stuff I've been talking about since January, but giving you some flavor of what we've been hearing from clients around the world. And I'm going to spend just a quick second on this one. I have been told by a number of my clients, Duncan, we didn't particularly want to move to the cloud, even during the pandemic. But something interesting happened. Our large enterprise software vendors, our ERP vendor, our database vendor, our enterprise business intelligence vendor, they've moved to the cloud and they are bringing us with them. I call this vendor drag along. And if you have friends who work at IBM or Oracle or SAP, don't suggest to them that I'm comparing them to a small white dog, but you get the idea. Many clients of mine are being pulled into the cloud as a result of their vendors moving. The other thing that we've discovered is that dozens at this point of my clients have said, Duncan, 2 years ago, we were cloud cautious. We were worried about all kinds of stuff like data sovereignty and price and vendor lock-in and flexibility and reliability. And in March, April of 2020, we had to move a whole bunch of stuff to the cloud. It was like this just massive shift. And when we did, we were terrified. Oh no, what's going to happen with all of those issues we worried about? And we realized we can solve those issues. They're there, they're real. Security matters, sovereignty matters, all that stuff matters. But we figured those out. And there's two implications as a result of that. One, now that we've moved so much to the cloud, we're not moving stuff back to on-prem. And second, now that we have got the processes and so forth in place that allow us to manage the risks about cloud transition, we have accelerated our digital transformation roadmap going forward. And we are, in fact, going forward, moving to the cloud faster than we would have expected a couple of years ago. Everybody, pay no attention to the lady behind me. She is just feeding our dog breakfast. So it's the challenge of the Zoom call. I'm not seeing any questions here, and I'm just going to keep driving. I want to spend a second talking about virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality. These are headsets, right? Now, you've probably seen slides like this. This is in the enterprise. Digital reality changes everything. It is absolutely being used by companies like ThyssenKrupp, like Caterpillar, IBM, auto industry for sure. You can see the stuff there on digital twins. Lots and lots of training. Training is 75% of the market. As a colleague of mine said, if it's too dangerous, too difficult, or too expensive to train in the real world, why wouldn't you train in a virtual one? I love that book. The only thing is, it is sometimes too dangerous, difficult, or expensive to train in the real world, but an awful lot of training consists of people sitting in rooms looking at Excel spreadsheets, which is not particularly dangerous, difficult, or expensive. Although there are use cases out there where VR, AR, and MR training is the right solution, there aren't as many as you might think. So here comes our prediction. Duncan and Deloitte are predicting that VR, AR, MR headset sales in the enterprise in 2021 will be 200,000 headsets. You mean 200 million, right? Nope, 200,000. Oh, in Canada, worldwide, it's much larger. No, that 200,000 number is in fact the global number for the use of AR, VR, and MR headsets in enterprise and education. This is a growing, that number is going to be double what it was in 2019, but it's a really niche small market. Why? Headsets are shared devices. Walmart trained 1 million people. They did. They only use 17,000 headsets because everybody did their little 10 hours of training modules and then they gave it to the next worker. So the number of employees is not a one-to-one match with the number of headsets. Not every worker needs it. Not every location needs it. But this last part's a big deal. U.S. Army had a 2018 deal for Microsoft HoloLens, a $480 million deal. But that was only 2,500 headsets. Now, that deal has just been expanded. It's now $22 billion over a decade. And that's for, you ready? 120,000 headsets over 10 years. That's 12,000 headsets a year. Even these really, really big deals, the headsets themselves are only a small part of the overall solution. So I'm going to keep talking about this in a second, about the enterprise. But before I do, I want to spend a second talking about consumers. Consumer virtual reality headset shipments back in 2019 were nearly 6 million units. And I would have thought, if you had asked me back last March, I think we may have had this conversation, Yvonne. I think you may have said, hey, what do you think about VR and the pandemic? And I've said, at the time, I said, I expect this pandemic to be a massive tailwind. People aren't going to be allowed to travel, so they'll travel virtually using VR headsets. People aren't, because of quarantines and stuff, they're not going to be allowed to exercise outside. So they're going to buy VR headsets and they're going to go biking and running and hiking and playing golf virtually. And of course, there's going to be millions of parents at home with teenagers who aren't going to school and are bored out of their minds. And I predict that several million parents will buy their kids a VR headset and lock them in the basement. You know, hey, stay out of my hair. Go play with your headset. In every way I could have thought about this back in last March, April, May, I would have predicted that VR headset sales to the consumer would have doubled or tripled or maybe even gone up 5 times. Instead, they shrank. That's telling me something. To quote Ben Evans, a famous technology blogger, this should have been, the pandemic should have been a VR moment, and it wasn't. If a global pandemic isn't enough to encourage the adoption, the massive adoption of VR headsets, of AR headsets, of MR headsets, then I think we need to be super realistic. There are absolutely cases where headsets are necessary, but this remains an exciting and interesting market, but a much smaller market than many people think. Not seeing any questions, and I'm just going to plow ahead so that I can hand it over. Susanne, this is my last topic, so brace yourself. You're up after me. I want to spend a second talking about the intelligent edge. Now, once again, this one matters for the auto industry, I believe, enormously. I'll explain why. When we talk about computing, there's stuff I can do at the traditional core. That is, if you are in Windsor, Essex, and you've got an automobile plant, you can be doing some processing down in San Francisco, down in Silicon Valley, which is what, 5,000 kilometers away. Or maybe you'll do something in Detroit, which is what, 50, 60, maybe a little further away, kilometers. Or sometimes you need to do stuff actually in Windsor, really, really close to the plant you have, okay? That's what we call the edge network. We predict the market for that will be $12 billion this year, growing 100% compared to 2019. A lot of that will be telecoms and hyperscale in 2021, but beyond that, it starts expanding into manufacturing, industrial, and supply chain, and by that, we mean including the auto sector. I'll explain why in a second. Well, no, I'll do it right now. Why does the intelligent edge matter? So I want you to think about an automobile plant. I want you to think about a couple of applications there. One of them is going to be visual inspection of maybe alignment, fit, finish, stuff like that. So super, super high resolution imaging, large data files, okay? Some of it is going to be robots moving around the factory, bringing parts here and here and here, okay? Or maybe even controlling robots telematically, okay? So very, very fast moving stuff, very important, very critical. Some of it's going to be proprietary. The final one I want you to think about is real-time fault detection. Maybe a big machine, big, heavy machine, and maybe you can do prediction on it, where if you can stop that machine just the second before it breaks, you can save millions of dollars and many hours of downtime on the entire factory, okay? Have you got those applications in your head? Great. Think about those. one of the examples is the visual inspection. I don't want to be sending giant files all the way to California and back. My cost of data transmission becomes prohibitive. It's much, much cheaper to do it in Windsor, Essex. Okay, well, what about those fault detection, the machine that might break? Well, that's a thing where milliseconds matter. I don't want to be hauling my data all the way from Windsor to California and back to stop a machine that's about to break. Instead, I want to drive latency down to as low as possible. In that case, edge processing is much, much faster than doing it in the core of the network. Autonomy. Once again, I can't allow the network to go down. I don't want to rely on a cloud network between here and San Francisco. Putting that edge processing in my automobile factory within a kilometer or two, or even hundreds of meters or two, is the more autonomous way of doing it. There are some other things in here: privacy, sovereignty, security. If I've got stuff working in my factory that I don't want getting hacked into, I don't want somebody interfering with in an act of industrial sabotage, if I don't want, normally the auto industry is pretty integrated between Canada and the US, but if I don't want my data going to the States for whatever reason, maybe facial recognition of employees, once again, doing the intelligent edge allows us to move that stuff to the edge of the network. I'm seeing a question here from Adam Fry. Hey, Adam. Will Open RAN and edge computing power the future of agritech, or as well as automotive, or are we further away with ag? Adam, I think you know the answer to this one. We are further away with ag. There are some interesting applications, but one of the problems is with ag tech, it depends, but it tends more often to be edge alone rather than edge plus Open RAN. I'm thinking down to Leamington, large tomato fields. It's hard running a wireless network over hectares and hectares of crops. Now, in a more dense environment, Adam, like in a greenhouse, maybe you would have a wired solution. That might be Open RAN, but, and I'm about to throw to Susanne on this one, it might also be Wi-Fi. But conceptually, you are completely correct. Open RAN and edge, big now in auto, I would expect. Over time, interesting for agritech, but I would tend to lean towards edge computing first, with connectivity maybe second. Interesting question, but Susanne may have some thoughts on that. Blaze, I see yes, Blaze, you're saying you saw a headline that Dish was looking at using cloud tech to bring down the cost of the transition to 5G. That is Open RAN, Blaze. What you are talking about is our friends at Dish discussing using Open RAN technology to in fact build their 5G network. So that is exactly what I was talking about with Open RAN. It's Open RAN in the cloud, but it is Open RAN. Rob, you've got a question here on a bunch of other stuff. I'm going to let Susanne go next, but I'll get to that one in a minute, okay? But I'm going to go back now. Hang on, how do I make this go away? I'm going to go back. And Susanne, I hope you're, just before I go, this is a real story, okay? All this stuff about intelligent edge sounds kind of science fiction-y, and is it really happening? Yes, it is. Port in Southeast Asia, I believe it's Shenzhen, moved to an Open RAN, not Open RAN, an intelligent edge solution. True story. Used to take 4 days to unload a ship. It now takes 2.5. Okay? Is anybody having trouble working out the math on that one? Okay, I'm going to skip over these because we just don't have time. Some cool stuff there. I will, as always, put up my Connect page, so do reach out. Duncan does not have a newsletter. I do not have a a subscription service, but I do write articles on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So please do follow me. It's sort of like my newsletter. Susanne, I'm going to hand it over to you. Yvonne, can you unlock? Don't mute me if you don't mind. I'm going to mute myself. Yvonne.
Hi there. Thanks. Can everyone hear me fine? Okay, great. So as Duncan said in that great introduction, I've got a spot here to tell you about a recent study that we launched just a few weeks ago that was all about 5G and Wi-Fi 6 and how organizations are accelerating innovation and transformation with those advanced wireless technologies. So for this study, we surveyed 9 countries, and I should say that earlier in 2020, before the effects of the pandemic were felt, we had a very similar study in just the US. And then building upon that study, we extended our survey to 9 countries outside the US later in the year during the midst of the effects of the pandemic. And we really wanted to better understand how and why enterprises are adopting advanced wireless technologies, in particular 5G and Wi-Fi 6, with particular attention on trying to understand what's motivating them to adopt, what kind of challenges they're experiencing, and what their preferences are for adoption. So this was 437 global networking executives. About 6 in 10 of them came from the C-suite, and it was weighted a bit more heavily toward IT. We had 7 in 10 that were IT respondents and 3 in 10 that were coming from the business. Next slide, please. So what we found compared to our earlier US study that was done before the pandemic, we found that networking executives have rapidly shifted their focus over to advanced wireless technologies, and it happened a lot faster than we were expecting from our US study. From that study and what the executives told us there, we thought that attention would shift to those newer technologies sometime within the next 3 years. But in fact, when we extended to these global respondents, we found that they already were very squarely focused on the new technologies like 5G and Wi-Fi 6, which were already viewed as their most critical wireless networking technologies for their business. And a little bit surprising to us, we didn't find that there are fans of 5G versus fans of Wi-Fi 6, with some companies adopting one very heavily and other companies adopting the other very heavily. In fact, we found that 98% are expecting their organization to use both of those within the next 2 to 3 years. So it's a very strong story about parallel adoption of various wireless technologies. 8 in 10 of them told us that they thought advanced wireless is going to transform their organization within the next 3 years. And 7 in 10 say the same thing about their industry. And that may be a little surprising because, after all, both 5G and Wi-Fi 6 are the latest advances in technologies that have been evolving for decades now. So you might think that there would be incremental advances from them, but in fact, the adopters think they're going to be really transformative. And we'll see why in a moment. 3/4 of them believe their company can create a significant competitive advantage with advanced wireless. So these executives realize how important advanced wireless is to their business success today. And it's about 8 in 10 of them that say that the technologies are either very important or critically important. And they believe they'll be even more important 3 years from now. So the portion that views them as critically important is set to rise from 20% of respondents now to about 32% within 3 years. And if we look at automotive, that was even a little higher. 41% believe advanced wireless will be critically important in 3 years. So to get into our survey, the respondents needed to say they were either in the process of adopting one of these technologies or planning to within the next 3 years. So it was a relatively low bar. But what we found is that they're already going all in when it comes to either piloting or deploying advanced wireless technologies. For Wi-Fi 6, we found that 40% of our respondents are deploying it and another 27% are piloting it. For 5G, the numbers are a little bit lower. 31% say they're starting to deploy it and another 27% say they're piloting. And interestingly, if you look at our automotive respondents, they're about on par when it comes to Wi-Fi 6, but on the 5G front, 45% of them appear to already be doing some deployment and 32% are piloting. So they appear to be a little bit ahead on 5G. So what was causing that focus of the executives to shift so strongly to advanced wireless when we compared our US respondents to the global respondents? One of the main reasons for that appears to be the pandemic. And in fact, we asked them to consider how their investment plans for advanced wireless compare now to what they were thinking they would spend before the pandemic happened. And in fact, half of them told us their investments are going to be greater now due to the pandemic. 26% said they wouldn't make any changes to the investments, and only 23% told us that they're going to pull back on wireless investments. So if you look a little more closely at that group that said that the pandemic is making them invest more, you can see the reasons for that on the right. The top reason was that they believe that wireless will help them increase their ability to address both the current disruption and future disruptions. They also think it will help them create or enhance solutions to address new use cases and challenges. And I know, this harkens back to what Duncan was saying about things like telehealth, for which advanced wireless connections are really important. And then the third biggest reason is to enhance network security and privacy. Next slide, please. So thinking back to what I said about how they believe that the technologies will be very transformative over the next few years, we believe it comes from what we're seeing on this slide. We asked them what are the top benefits that they're trying to achieve with advanced wireless. And the number one goal, tied with improving efficiency, is actually taking advantage of new technologies. So they see advanced wireless as being this wonderful enabler. And in fact, more than 8 in 10 of them said that advanced wireless is integral to their efforts to deploy other innovative technologies like cloud, big data analytics, AI, IoT, and edge. And they're really putting it at the core of their innovation efforts. Next slide, please. So one final point is about the ecosystem. And we found that the ecosystem is incredibly complex now and also evolving really rapidly. And also tech companies have a very key role to play in it. So when it comes to adopting, both the internal IT staff at these companies and their tech vendors are seen as the most influential in guiding their choices for advanced wireless adoption. And CIOs and CTOs and also IT managers are leading that adoption. So very heavy tech influence there. And in terms of the types of vendors that these companies engage with as they adopt, we asked about 9 different types of vendors, and on average, the adopters engage with about 8 different types of vendors, and often with multiple vendors in each type. So it's a very complex ecosystem that goes into helping a company create a full wireless solution. One thing that was really interesting, though, is that we also asked, how likely are you to stay with your current vendors, or are you considering changing? And only 3 in 10 of them told us that they absolutely prefer to keep engaging with the current vendors. And the other 7 in 10 said they're at least somewhat interested in possibly switching to other vendors. 2/3 of them believe that they will integrate some best of breed modules as opposed to buying full end-to-end solutions. And that, of course, means they're going to have a heavy need for integration. For that, they prefer cloud companies and in-house teams to lead that integration. And one thing that I thought was very interesting from automotive, because this was very high compared to other industries we looked at, but about 7 in 10 automotive respondents expect to primarily deploy and manage their wireless networking applications and services on public cloud in 2 to 3 years. And then there was another portion that said that they would be doing it on private cloud. Thank you. That was really just a whirlwind tour, but if you're interested, we have a full report that's available, and you can also feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you may have.
I hope, Suzanne, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Okay, thanks, Suzanne. Awesome job. I really thought that that last point you made about automotive and public cloud at the very end there was a real interesting takeaway for this group. So I see I have a bunch of questions in the Q&A. I'm actually going to stop sharing because I don't think we need to have the slides up there anymore. Let's see. I'm just going to look here. So I have some questions here. Let's see if I've got some. I'm trying to look here. Okay, we've got okay, let's see, we'll just go through these. So I'm going to start from the bottom. A guy named Eder Felipe. Do you think companies are able to address vulnerabilities and security issues correctly as they migrate fast to the cloud to meet their needs during the pandemic? So Eder, great question. Let me take a swing at that one first. Suzanne, by the way, feel free to wave your arms if you have opinions on this. So one of the things that's come out of a lot of client conversations over the last 4 or 5 months is we got to remember that historically, one of the concerns out there is that the cloud is less secure than on-prem. There is no good data to suggest that. The cloud is not perfectly secure, but then again, neither is on-prem. Both have their vulnerabilities. Some of those vulnerabilities are the same, some are different. The absolute level of am I secure, am I insecure? It really depends how much money you spend on making yourself secure. However, at a high level, everything I've been talking about for the last 4 months is the cloud is not materially different, less secure than on-prem. However, what is insecure is as you point, Ader, as you say exactly, as you migrate fast to the cloud. The single biggest source of vulnerability today is moving from one to the other in a rapid and unconsidered fashion. That is the greatest source of insecurity. There is a Deloitte Canada paper that came out, gosh, I think in February or March. I can try finding that and sending this to my colleagues, but specifically talking about how do you address the security issue as you are moving rapidly from on-prem to the cloud. So great question. Are questions able to address that? Yes, there are solutions. It is not an inherently, it is not something where you are doomed to have a cyber breach as you move. Adam Fry asked a question. As our region looks to become a leader in automobility, CAV, cybersecurity, electrification, shared mobility, et cetera, what should we be focusing on when it comes to key infrastructure for both cities, towns, and companies? Interesting question, Adam. Fairly obviously, and some of this comes to Susanne, I would argue that there is no single magic wand. It's not like, oh, 5G, and then we solve all our problems. When it comes to the factories of the future, when it comes to the highways and roads of the future, when it comes to the municipalities of the future, transport corridors, I'm thinking about the bridges and tunnels over to Windsor, through Windsor and Detroit and stuff like that. When I kind of put all of that together, it's going to be a mix. We need to invest in 5G, but we also need to invest in private 5G. Some of that will be through traditional RAN vendors. Some of it will be through open RAN vendors. I believe that Wi-Fi 6, obviously not at the municipality level as much, but inside factories, inside warehouses, at the border crossings. I believe there's other technologies we haven't discussed there. Susanne, I think we had some detail on some of the short range stuff, the things like LoRa and Sigfox and the LPWAN, low power wide area network markets. So any thoughts on kind of the mix of technologies there?
Yeah, we didn't focus as heavily on those, although they were part of some of our questions. And what's obvious is that they will continue to have kind of a niche role going forward. They don't have the same focus as the big ones like Wi-Fi 6 or 5G, but organizations will certainly find uses for them still.
Yeah, in the auto sector specifically, I'm interested in LPWAN, right? If you've got a factory, I can't remember the number, but the average car contains, I can't remember what it is, 12,000 different parts or whatever it is. Being able to asset track all of those in real time is something that is not, you couldn't do it with 5G. That's not the appropriate technology. Wi-Fi doesn't make sense. Maybe an LPWAN approach, pennies per transmitter, passively powered, no power source. That might be a more interesting one. So I think I'd get that in there. I have a question here from Rob Wendt. This was asked a few minutes ago. So Rob, Yvonne, can you remind me what time is this thing supposed to end? Maybe just put that in the Q&A. I can't remember what time we have a hard stop on, or you can just give me.
We're actually in good time. We're hoping to end around 9:45. So we've got
lots of time. Lots of time.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. Yvonne, the Q&A is always my favorite part.
I know I've got lots of questions too, but I'll let the attendees throw theirs in, and then I'll ask mine if there's a few minutes left.
Sure. Okay. So I'm seeing a question here from Rob Wendt. Quick thoughts on high-speed LEO, low Earth orbit internet, Starlink, etc., and cryptocurrency. And then I've got one from Adam Fry on what are your thoughts on NFTs. So let me take a swing at low Earth orbit internet first, and then I'll do crypto and NFTs at the same time next. Okay. All right, Rob, brace yourself. Years ago, I was asked to write a prediction on low Earth orbit satellites, and I said I don't want to because even if somebody builds a constellation, it's going to fail. Not so much because you can't get satellites in orbit, but you can't get that many. It's too expensive, and they just go bankrupt. We've tried this before. Elon Musk has said the same thing. He has said, our goal is not to be the first low Earth orbit constellation. Our goal is to be the first low Earth orbit constellation that doesn't go bankrupt. Okay, so it's always been about the economics. And there have been some changes in the last few years that have made me rethink where we go on low Earth orbit. So I'm going to start off with those. It's 90% cheaper to get stuff into orbit. The satellites themselves cost 90% less. It's now you can now make them like you make cars on assembly lines, mass production. The satellite dishes are better and cheaper. We are seeing a remarkable thing. Starlink has, I believe, 1558 satellites in orbit right now. They have more low Earth orbit satellites than the rest of the world put together in a single constellation, and they're launching about 200 or 300 per month, okay? And they just keep going. There are other players, Amazon's Kuiper, OneWeb out of the UK, Canada's Telesat, I can't remember the name of this, I forget the name of the Telesat proposal, and the Chinese have gone to the ITU and asked permission for 13,000 satellites in orbit. Okay, so now, why does all that matter? And why does it matter for the automobile industry? It doesn't in deepest, darkest downtown Windsor or Detroit, even in Dearborn. Where it matters is as you start getting a little bit outside that urban area. Normally not where you build automobile plants, but maybe where you've got vehicles, trucks driving around in areas where coverage from 5G or even 4G is not good. Starlink has just announced that they have a plan for a version 2 of their satellite dish, which will be able to be mounted on top of a car or a truck and work. So that's new. That's new. The reason this all matters is that if Starlink builds a constellation, and basically they're done, and OneWeb does, and that looks pretty probable. Amazon is really slow so far. They haven't even got a single satellite in orbit, but boy, they've got deep pockets. The Chinese are going to build their own. Okay, I guarantee you this. There is no way that the People's Republic of China is going to trust to an American constellation. It's just not going to happen. China has a lot of people in rural areas who could use satellite internet. China has a lot of ships at sea, planes in the air, Belt and Road partners, military facilities. China has significant economic incentives to spend $20 billion to build their own low Earth orbit network, okay? So do the Russians, so does the EU. What happens when there are 3 or 4 private LEO constellations, plus 3 or 4 Chinese, EU, Russia constellations? We are going to have a bunch of ballpark 50 to 150 meg down, 25 to 50 up, 30 millisecond latency, low Earth orbit networks, all of whom have high fixed costs, but essentially 0 variable costs. There will be a strong economic incentive for them to dump data. China cares about China. They don't really care about the middle of Ontario. And if somebody wants really possibly insecure, but nonetheless very cheap data from orbit in the middle of southwestern Ontario, that may be a thing. So I think the really interesting part about LEO Internet is not Starlink, although that is interesting. I think the interesting thing happens 5 to 10 years from now when you end up in what I am calling data wars, where you have multiple constellations eager to not go bankrupt, who will all be offering data at the lowest price possible in rural areas. Now, critical thing, this stuff doesn't scale. None of this has anything to do with downtown Detroit, downtown Windsor, downtown Toronto, downtown Boston, where Susanne is. The number of users per square kilometer is highly constrained from orbit. I can support people in the middle of Montana or the middle of China or the middle of Saskatchewan quite easily, but in any urban area, it simply doesn't scale. So it's very much a rural and remote access technology. It has minimal effect on dense urban areas. So that's that question. Sorry to go so long, but this I think is a really important and unexplored issue. It's not just about Starlink. It's about 8 constellations at the same time. Next question was cryptocurrency. I have no strong views on crypto. We, Deloitte, we certainly keep our eyes on crypto. It might be government-sponsored fiat currency, but what we are seeing is a lot of people are investing in crypto, good for them. A lot of people are making money at crypto, good for them. Very few people are using crypto as a payment technology. It is a lousy payment technology. It is expensive. It uses a lot of data. Not data, energy. It's slow. It doesn't scale well. If I have a one-to-one, smart contract thing, crypto blockchain works real well. But on the other hand, if I am doing something involving thousands or tens of thousands of users simultaneously, crypto breaks rapidly. So crypto, it's interesting as an investment. It's interesting as a technology. We are not seeing it used in the way that currency is normally used, which is for the payments of goods and services. Just not a lot of that so far. So great question, Rob. Thanks. Question on NFTs. What's going on NFTs? We actually have a prediction coming out on that for 2022, co-authored by my friend Paul Lee in the United Kingdom. We're looking at it in the sports collectible market, the NBA, the Premier League, NFL. We are seeing a ton of monetization, probably to the tune of $5 to $10 billion in 2022 around non-fungible tokens powered largely by Ethereum at this point. I have some longer term concerns about it from the energy perspective. That's something to keep your eye on. I also am not commenting on whether or not we're in a bubble. Beeple, the guy who sold his giant collage of digital images for, what was it, $69 million last month. He said, I think it's a bubble. I'm not saying that, but certainly caveat emptor, NFTs, I think it's an interesting approach for monetization of media properties like the NBA or Premier League. Would I invest in it personally? No opinion. It's too hard a question to answer. Nice question here from Trevor Ramieri. Any insights on EV battery technology? Trevor, thank you so much for asking. How is this relevant to somebody in Windsor, Essex? Just kidding. So Trevor, battery technologies get better year over year, but it tends to be largely a material science, a physics problem, a chemistry problem. There absolutely is improvements. Batteries get better every year, but they get better at 2 or 3 or 4% per annum. Now, over a 10 or 20 year period, that's why EV batteries are twice as good, 4 times as good, 10 times as good as they used to be, especially for automotive applications, automotive and transport applications. That said, there are some interesting new battery technologies that are sort of out there. All of those, to me, look like we will not see those in the next 5 to 10 years. Battery technology takes years to scale up, to go from a lab bench somewhere and showing that it is durable enough, it's safe enough, it's reliable enough. Producing a fantastic battery that takes 5,000 hours to charge is a non-starter. Producing a fantastic battery that bursts into flames is a non-starter. Producing a fantastic battery that dies after 20 discharge cycles is a lousy answer. So there's a lot of moving parts in battery. My high level view, and we haven't published an official prediction on this, but this is my sort of informal view, Trevor. I think the batteries we're going to be using in 5 years are going to be slightly better than the batteries we use today, but not step change different. I think it stays kind of in that slow and steady continuous improvement. Yvonne, why don't we take some of the questions from the crowd, especially if there's, I'm just going to answer a quick one here, Yvonne. Tom Krasanovich, can you speak briefly on trends within the consumer banking space? Tom, we'll answer that if we get a chance, but let's throw it over to Yvonne first.
Yeah, no, in fact, one of my questions is in there was more about the future of work, but perhaps if you'd like to take Tom, and Tom, it's so nice to see you.
Okay, well, why don't I start on the future of work? Remember I just told everybody to follow me on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook? That's because I published yesterday an article taking a look at a University of Chicago study that took a look at Tata. Most of you will know Tata, a large Indian IT company, 27,000 employees. They looked at their Sapient and Microsoft, not individually, it was aggregated data, but they looked at their productivity data pre-pandemic and post, not post, but during the pandemic. And they discovered something interesting, which is that people produced exactly the same amount before or after. Makes sense to me. You get fired at Tata if you don't do your job, just like everywhere else. However, it took people about 20 to 25% more hours to accomplish the same amount, which led them to conclude, at least, and I got to modify this a little, that at least during the pandemic, work from home, which was complicated by home care and quarantines and all kinds of other factors, at least during the pandemic, work from home saw a productivity decline. Do the math. If hours in were up and output is constant, that means productivity per hour dropped, in their estimate, by about 20%. And that was true for women and true for people who had kids, lots and lots of stuff there. Yvonne, the questions, so the head of JP Morgan, what was it, Jamie Dimon, said, people who hustle have to be in the office. People better go back. Somebody else, Dror Poleg, who writes this absolutely brilliant blog, he said, millennials don't care what Jamie Dimon thinks. You know, I don't think we know the answer about work from home, work from office. I don't know the implications for office space. I don't know the implications for cloud tools. There's a lot of moving parts. I will tell you something. Because Yvonne, you know me. I love peer-reviewed, properly designed academic papers rather than my cousin says. You know, the plural of anecdote is not data. So I love large, well-designed studies like the Chicago one. We are just seeing those now. The one I'm really interested in, Yvonne, is I'm interested in a study when we don't have a pandemic and then we have some company, maybe it's Deloitte, where, you know, we have 1,000 of our workers do work from office and 1,000 work from home, and there is no pandemic and there are no lockdowns and kids are off at school where they should be. That's going to be the one that really tells us how effective work from home is. Interesting question. How reliable is productivity data during the pandemic? Lee Doucette's question. That's the point. The data, I think, is very reliable, but it tells us an awful lot about what it's like to work during a pandemic, not what it's like to work post-pandemic. I think that's going to be the big question. Yvonne, do we have another question from the floor?
The only one I think is that I don't know if we want to address Tom's question about the consumer banking space, and then we'll wrap things up maybe after that.
Okay. Yeah, Tom, thanks for your question. Consumer banking, lots and lots of stuff going on there. Lots of unicorns. I think Wealthsimple just became the 10th or 11th Canadian unicorn. The one caution I am going to throw down, and Yvonne, I'm not sure you've ever heard me talk about this before. I remember years and years ago, there were a bunch of fintech companies in consumer banking who were, take a look at the banks. This is awful. They charge you, I can't remember what it was, 35 or 50, 65. It was $65 to transfer money to Europe. An EFT, an electronic funds transfer to Europe, was $65. We could do it for 20 using this technology. And the banks looked at that and they went, wow, you can do that. We'll do it for $17.50. And all of those fund transfer companies who said we can beat $65 couldn't beat $17.50, and they all went out of business. I think within consumer banking, the trends there are a lot about empowering people, the Robinhoods, the Wealthsimples. A lot of it's about appealing to millennials, but a lot of it is about appealing to women. Yvonne, you know this. You've been interviewed.
I just downloaded Wealthsimple. So.
But you remember Barbara. Barbara's been talking about you and your sister. So my wife is one of the world's leading researchers on women in finance, and one of the big market, women control 53% of all the money out there. They're especially the young ones. They're out there making money, they're saving money, they're investing. I would argue the biggest trend that I am seeing in consumer banking space is making things accessible to millennials, Gen Z, and women. It is an underserved, underappreciated, growing market that traditionally banks have, to use a technical term, sucked at. And I think that this is going to be one of the great innovations going forward. To coin a phrase, you know, what was Barbara's phrase? Finance is the new black. You know, lots and lots of cool stuff going on there. But I think focused on a lot of the, I mean, I should add, it's obviously not just women, not just millennials, but I'd also look in this era of diversity and inclusion. We are seeing a lot of underserved markets in the, here in Canada, in the Asian markets, in the US, in the Hispanic and the Black markets. I think that those are all underserved, underappreciated markets. And I think those are absolutely going to be a gold rush for consumer banking to better serve underserved markets.
Perfect. Well, Duncan, like every year, we wish we could have more time with you, but to all those still on the Zoom with us, again, I encourage you to follow Duncan and Susan on social media. Again, lots of great content that's ongoing. Again, I've followed Duncan for years and always find there's some great content there. A big thank you, Duncan and Susan, for joining us and bringing all of your insights, your research and your predictions. I can only hope that the 22 predictions includes us meeting in person. Duncan, maybe, as you mentioned about the brewery a number of years ago, we have one of the largest publicly available or accessible virtual reality caves for autonomous vehicle technologies. And it would be really cool for you to do a session in that virtual reality cave. So if the team at the Automobility Innovation Center are watching, perhaps that's where we can kick ourselves off for the 2022 predictions. Before we say goodbye, I do want to thank again the Deloitte team. A lot of people were behind the scenes, including Renee, Asmita, Remy Tosti, and Matt. Thank you all for participating in our event partners, Invest Windsor Essex, City of Windsor, SOAR Innovation, and Chatham-Kent Economic Development Corporation. Thank you for your partnership. Before we say goodbye, just a few announcements. Again, you will get a follow-up email. It will include the slides, linked to the actual 2021 full TMT report. Susan, if you're willing to share your slides, I can get those in as well. I'll add in all of the social media details so you can instantly connect if you didn't have a chance to jot things down. Also, just yesterday, WeTech launched our cybersecurity path report. This was a 9-month study in terms of what the future looks like for us to become a cybersecurity expert in the Windsor, Essex, Chatham-Kent region. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check our website out or our social media accounts. We'll also link that report in the follow-up email. And lastly, if anyone on this line is interested to hear about the automobility opportunities in the region, including the VR cave, please feel free to reach out. Lots of great things happening. I can't say enough about all the amount of times I hear electric vehicles, battery in my daily conversations. We are on the move. So with that, thank you again, everyone, for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day, week, and we look forward to seeing you in person for 2022. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.